This is James Ferris, editor of the Madison Business Review, and I'm talking with Landon Bursch, a contributing writer, about his story, How Employers Can Better Reach Young, Purpose-Driven Workers. Landon, how are you?
I'm doing well today.
Awesome. Great to hear from you, and thank you so much for joining us. I was fascinated when you pitched this story to me, and especially your perspective. If you want to tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I go to James Madison University. I'm a rising senior, communications study major. So like a bunch of seniors at JMU, I'm about to be going into the workforce, and I just kind of wanted to get a perspective of how, what managers want to see, and how is this generation transitioning into the workforce.
Yeah, and I think you have a really great perspective on this. So what would you say your story is about briefly?
I would say it's an overview of what each generation, from baby boomer to Generation Z, what their characteristics are, and how the younger generation, I would say the tail end of millennial and Generation Z, how they are perceived in the workforce and how they either cooperate with their managers or employers. And also just gives a few tips on for managers and employers, how to connect with these types of workers.
Absolutely, Landon. And I think that's so crucial, especially now. I sense a growing disconnect in our country on many fronts, and I think understanding each other is especially important right now. And I believe this article will provide an excellent way for people to do that. So that being said, let's hear from some of your coworkers at Costco. I know that's where you're working this summer, and I really appreciate how you sought out the perspectives of young people to really bolster your article. So here is a snippet from Ligeria James, a 23-year-old cashier at Costco.
I want to wake up for work and be excited about what I'm doing. It is not my dream to work for the rest of my life. I don't really have a dream job. I have passions, but I don't dream to work for the majority of my life. So, yeah.
So, Landon, what struck you about what Ligeria shared with you?
What struck me was just the part where she talks about she does not have a particular dream job, but she doesn't have the dream of working her entire life. And I think a lot of people between the ages of 18 and 23, this Gen Z type this age field, I kind of have the same perspective. We really value our personal and social lives, and not as our work lives.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are growing into their strengths as workers, and they're still trying to discover that. I mean, a lot of people forget that these students, these young people grew up with the internet, and that definitely shape aspects of how they view work and how they view productivity in general, and how they prioritize leisure and how they prioritize work. So with that said, let's get to Jamal Phillips McGill. He's a 28-year-old member service worker at Costco, and he really values things like a strong culture, a work-life balance, and security when he's considering employers.
I want employees to be treated as if they mean something to the business, because I believe that if you treat your employees better, they'll treat your business good. If they're paid good, they'll work good. You feel what I'm saying? If they have insurance, it makes them feel at peace.
So Landon, when you were talking with Jamal, what stuck out to you from what he said?
Something that stuck out to me was when he talked about having insurance and having that sense of peace. One thing that resonated with me was just when he said that if they're paid good, they'll work good. And he kind of I can tell in his voice and what he was saying that he wanted the sense of security and knowing that his family is going to be looked after and that he'll be able to provide. So that's another thing that really stands out from this younger side of the millennials, where they're not just carefree, they're not careless maybe stereotypes might be. They're actually very serious about what they want to do. They want to provide for their families. They want to have that sense of security.
Right. Landon, that makes so much sense. And I think something you touched on in your article is a lot of these younger people grew up, they were in grade school when the 2007-2008 financial crisis hit, which of course built up through 2007, happened in 2008 and 2009, and it took years to recover from that, and that's made them cautious. So I really think that's good insight that you touched on in your article. Another person you talk to is Lauren Wynn, and she is strictly in Gen Z. She's a 20-year-old cashier at Costco, and she really pointed out that she wanted to be respected at work. Let's hear what she had to say.
If I'm not treated good, I'm not gonna give you a good product. But if you treat me fairly and everything else is like equally amount, I'll give you more than what you do.
All right, Landon. So from knowing Lauren and what she values, what did you think about what she had to say? And are there any conclusions you can draw about Gen Z, this younger generation born in 1997 and after, as a whole?
One thing I can draw from what Lauren said and Gen Z in general is kind of what I briefly talked about in the article, and it's just that these kids, or I shouldn't say kids, these young adults, they don't want any BS. They want their companies to be transparent.
Yes.
And one thing I really liked hearing from this was that if you treat me fairly, I'll give you what you want, and I'll give you more than what you want.
Sure.
And that just shows that, like, this generation is willing to go the extra mile, but they're not going to just stick their hand all the way out. They do want their employer or their authority to give them that extra hand, just say, hey, like, we're here for you. And like, we do want you to exceed your goals.
Yeah, I totally agree, Landon. And seeing how younger generations are holding corporations accountable with how they treat workers, how they treat the environment, I think those are trends that you're definitely onto in this article. And then finally, I know you talked with Lisa Robinson, who's a manager at Costco, who oversees the three that we've heard from. And she's in her early 50s. And so she's strictly in Gen X. Let's hear what Lisa had to say.
Previous generations, I can only go by, maybe my generation and maybe 10 years older. They come from a different generation where the expectations that in their home life is laborious. They, of course they played sports, but they were a functioning part of their family. The kids were expected to participate in taking care of the home, mowing the lawn, cleaning the cars. They had tasks that they had to do. So that generation came more prepared to work in a labor sense because they already knew how to multitask and they knew how to start a job. They could see it from the beginning to the end. Kids that are coming in today come from a different perspective.
All right, Landon. So now, from knowing Lisa, would you say you were surprised on what she said?
The only part of me that was surprised at what she said was just knowing the generational gap between us. Because, there is a stereotype for younger millennials and Gen Z that were entitled and lazy. But a part of me that wasn't surprised was just knowing Lisa and how she manages us and how she goes beyond just the management role, but she also takes the perspective of a teacher.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And teaching is so important. As you touched on in your article, Gen Z has really been focused on education, not just in the classroom, because every generation prior has had that experience. But Gen Z, a lot of people who are younger, born 1997 and after, are teaching themselves things. They're going on, for example, Khan Academy and other similar sites, and they're learning new skills. So they're used to learning, and I think they prefer the dynamic between employer and employee that's more like a teacher. And finally, I know you touched on practical, hands-on ways employers can connect with and form strong working relationships with these younger people and how they can better reach them. And for that, we'll encourage people to head over to breezejmu.org/business and check out Landon's story, how employers can better connect with young, purpose-driven workers. Landon, thank you so much for joining us, and I can't wait to read your story.